Hello, story lovers, and welcome. This time, we're going to hear the story Bluebeard. But before we do, make sure you are comfortable and somewhere that you would like to fall asleep. Take a minute to take stock of your body. Are you holding tension anywhere? Relax your face. Relax your shoulders and your back. Take a few deep breaths, in through your nose and out through your mouth. And we'll start the story. Bluebeard. In the east, in a city not far from Baghdad, there lived a man who had many possessions and might have been envied by all who knew him had these possessions been less by one. He had fine houses in town and country, retinues of servants, gold and silver plate in abundance, coffers heaped with jewels, costly carpets, embroidered furniture, cabinets full of curiosities, gilded coaches, teams of Arab horses of the purest breed. But unluckily, he had also a blue beard, which made him so frightfully ugly that every woman wanted to scream and run away at the sight of him. Among his neighbors was a lady of quality who had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Among these damsels, Bluebeard cast his affections without knowing precisely which he preferred, and asked the lady to bestow the hand of one of her daughters upon him, adding, not too tactfully, that he would leave the choice to her. Neither Anne nor Fatima was eager for the honor. They sent their suitor to and fro and back again from one to the other. They really could not make up their minds to accept a husband with a blue beard. It increased their repugnance, for they were somewhat romantic young ladies, to learn that he had already married several wives, and moreover, nobody could tell what had become of them, which again was not reassuring. Bluebeard, to make their better acquaintance, invited them with their mother and brothers and a dozen or so of their youthful friends to divert themselves at one of his country houses, where they spent a whole fortnight and, as they confessed, in the most agreeable pastimes. Each day brought some fresh entertainment. They hunted, they hawked, they practiced archery, they angled for goldfish, or were rowed to the sound of music on the waters in their host's private canal. They picnicked in the ruined castles, of which he owned quite a number. Each day concluded too with banqueting, dancing, card parties, theatricals, or would have concluded, had these young people felt any disposition to go to bed. They preferred, however, to sit up until morning, joking and teasing one another. Bluebeard, who had arrived at middle age, would have been grateful for a little more sleep than they allowed him, but showed himself highly complacent and smiled at their pranks, even when, their awe of him having worn off, they balanced a basin of water above his chamber door to fall on his head and drench him, or sewed up his night garments, or stuffed his bolster with a prickly cactus, an eastern vegetable of which he possessed whole avenues. Nay, even when, for the same mischievous purposes, they despoiled his garden of an aloe which was due to blossom in a few days' time after having remained flowerless for a century, he betrayed no chagrin, but merely raised the wages of his head gardener, heartbroken over the loss of a plant so economical in giving pleasure. In short, all went so smoothly that the younger daughter began to find their host's beard not so blue after all. She confided this to her mother, "Dear mother," she said, "it is doubtless nothing more than my fancy, but his beard does seem to me to have altered in color during the last 10 days. A very little, of course." "Then you too have observed it," the lady interrupted delightedly. "My dearest child, you cannot imagine how your words relieve me. For a week past I have accused my eyesight of failing me, and myself of growing old." "Then you really think there is a change?" asked Fatima, at once doubtful and hoping. "Indeed, yes. Ask yourself if it be reasonable to suppose that our eyes are playing a trick on both of us. Not," her mother went on, "that I, for my part, have any prejudice against blue. On the contrary, it is a beautiful color and considered lucky. The poets, you will have remarked, when they would figure to us the highest attainable happiness, select a blue flower or a blue bird for its emblem. Heaven itself is blue, and at the least a blue beard must be allowed to confer distinction." "A grayish blue," hazarded Fatima. "A bluish gray, rather," her mother corrected her. "That is, if I must define the shades as it appears to me." "And," still hesitated Fatima, "since it has begun to change, there seems no reason why it should not continue to do so." "My darling," her mother kissed her, "that is precisely the point. Its color is changing, you say, but for what reason? Obviously, because he is in love, and what love has begun, love can carry to a conclusion. Nay, but put it on the ground of pity alone. Could a feeling heart set itself any task more angelic than to rescue so worthy a gentleman from so hideous an affliction, if affliction it be, which I am far from allowing?" Fatima reflected on her mother's advice, but thought it prudent to consult her sister Anne and her stepbrothers before coming to a decision which, once taken, must be irrevocable. They listened to her very good-naturedly, though, to tell the truth, all three were somewhat jaded, having sat up all night at the card tables, playing at ombre, quadrille, lansquenet, and heaven knows what other games. "My dear Fatima," said her sister Anne with a little yawn, "I congratulate you with all my heart on having made a discovery which, beyond a doubt, and but for your better diligence, I should have had to make myself before long." As for her stepbrothers, they were in the best of humors at having won a considerable sum of money from their host by superior play, and they answered her, quoting a proverb, that at night all cats are gray, and all beards too, and seemed to consider this very much to the point. Fatima was greatly relieved by these assurances. On the evening before the company dispersed, Bluebeard again sought a private interview and pressed his suit. She accepted him without further ado, and as soon as they returned to town, the marriage was concluded. They had been married little more than a month when Bluebeard came to his wife one morning and told her that letters of importance had arrived for him. He must take a journey to the country and be away 6 weeks, at least on a matter of business. He desired her to divert herself in his absence by sending for her friends, to carry them off to the country if she pleased, and to make good cheer wherever she was. "Here," said he, "are the keys of the 2 great store chambers where I keep my spare furniture. These open the strong rooms of my gold and silver plate, which is only used on state occasions. These unlock my chests of money, both gold and silver. These my jewel coffers. And this is the master key to all my apartments, But this little one here is the key of the closest at the end of the great gallery on the ground floor. Open all the others, go where you will, but into that little closet I forbid you to go, and I forbid it so strongly that if you should disobey me and open it, there is nothing you may not expect from my displeasure." Fatima promised to obey his orders exactly, whereupon he embraced her, got into his coach, and was driven off. Her good friends and neighbors scarcely waited for the young bride's invitation, so impatient were they to view all the riches of her grand house, having never dared to come while her husband was at home because of his terrifying Bluebeard. They overran the house without loss of time, hunting their curiosity from room to room, along the corridors, and in and out of closets and wardrobes, cabinets and presses, opening cupboards, ferreting in drawers, and still exclaiming over their contents, as each new discovery proved more wonderful than the last. They roamed through the bedrooms and spent a long while in the two great store chambers, where they could not sufficiently admire the number and beauty of the tapestries, beds, sofas, consoles, stands, tables, but particularly the looking-glasses, in which you could see yourself from head to foot, with their frames of glass and silver gilt, the finest and costliest ever seen. They ceased not to extol and to envy their friends' good fortune. "If my husband could only give me such a house as this," said one to another, "for aught I cared he might have a beard of all colors of the rainbow." Fatima, meanwhile, was not in the least amused by the sight of all these riches, being consumed by a curiosity even more ardent than that of her friends. Indeed, she could scarcely contain herself and listen to their chatter, so impatient she felt to go and open the closet downstairs. If only Bluebeard had not forbidden this one little thing, or if, having reasons of his own to keep it secret, he had been content to take the key away with him, saying nothing about it, at least if he wished to prove whether or not poor Fatima could rise above the common frailty of her sex. And he was, as we shall see, a somewhat exacting husband. He should have warned her. As it was, her curiosity grew and possessed her until, at length, without even considering how uncivil it was to leave her guests, she escaped from them and ran down a little back staircase in such haste that twice or thrice she tripped over her gown and came near breaking her neck. When she reached the door of the closet, she hesitated for a moment or so, thinking upon her husband's command and considering what ill might befall her if she disobeyed it. While he uttered it, his look had been extremely stern, and a Bluebeard, for after a month of married life she could no longer disguise from herself that it was still blue, or at any rate changing color less rapidly than she or her mother had promised themselves, might betoken a harsh temper. On the other hand, and though she continued to find it repulsive, he had hitherto proved himself a kind, even an indulgent husband, and for the life of her she could not imagine there being anything unpardonable in opening so small a chamber. The temptation, in short, was too strong for her to overcome. She took the little key and, trembling, opened the door. At first, shading her eyes and peering in, she could see nothing because the window shutters were closed. But after some moments, she began to perceive that the light falling through the shutters took a reddish tinge when it touched the floor. So red it was, or rather red-purple, that for a moment or two she supposed that the closet to be paved with a porphyry of that color. Still, As she stared, and her eyes by degrees grew accustomed to the gloom, she saw, and moment by moment the truth crept upon her and froze her, that the floor was all covered with clotted blood. In the dull shine of it, something horrible was reflected. With an effort, she opened her eyes to the wall facing her, and there in a row, on 7 iron clamps, hung the bodies of 7 dead women with their feet dangling a few inches above the horrible pool in which their blood had mingled. Little doubt but these were the wives whom Bluebeard had married and whose throats he had cut one after another. Poor Fatima thought to die of fear, and the key which she had pulled from the lock fell from her hand. When she had regained her senses a little, she picked it up and locked the door again. But her hand shook so that this was no easy feat, and she tottered upstairs to recover herself in her own room. But she found it filled with her officious friends, who, being occupied with envy of her riches, and having no reason to guess that, in a husband's absence, anything could afflict so fortunate a wife, either honestly ignored her pallor or hoped, while promising to come again, that they had not overtired her by their visit. They promised, too, to repeat their call very soon, at the same time inquiring how long her husband's journey might be expected to last. It was plain that they feared him, one and all. Half an hour ago she might have wondered at this. They were gone at last. Fatima, drawing the key from her pocket, now to her horror observed a dull smear upon it, and remembered that it had fallen at her feet on the edge of the pool of blood in the closet. She wiped it, rubbed it on the sleeve of her robe, but the blood would not come off. In a sudden terror, she ran to her dressing room, poured out water, and began to soap the key, but in vain she did wash it, and even scrape it with a knife and scrub it with sand and pumice stone. The blood still remained, for the key was a magic key, and there was no means of making it quite clean. As fast as the blood was scoured off one side, it came again on the other. She was still scouring and polishing when a horn sounded not very far away. In her flurry she paid little heed to this, or to the rumble of wheels she heard approaching. Frightened though she was, she supposed that she still had almost 6 weeks in which to restore by some means the key to its brightness. But when the wheels rolled up to the porchway and came to a stop, and when the horn sounding again blew her husband's flourish, then indeed the poor lady's knees knocked together and almost sank beneath her. Hiding the key in the bosom of her bodice, she tottered forth to the head of the stairs to behold Bluebeard himself standing beneath the lamp in the hall below. He caught sight of her as she leaned over, clinging to the balustrade, and called up cheerfully that he had received letters on the road with news that his journey was, after all, unnecessary. The business he went about had been settled, and to his advantage. Still shaking in every limb, Fatima crept downstairs to give him greeting. She ordered supper to be prepared in haste, and while he ate, forced herself to ask 100 questions concerning his adventures. In short, she did all she could to give him proof that she was delighted at his speedy return. Next morning, having summoned her to attend him on the terrace, he asked her to render back the keys, which she gave him, but with such a trembling hand that he easily guessed what had happened. "How is this?" said he. "Why is not the key of my closet among the rest?" "I must have left it upstairs on my table," said Fatima. "Fetch it to me at once," said Bluebeard. "At once and without fail." She went, and after a while returned, protesting that she could not find it. "Go back and seek it again," commanded Bluebeard, dangerously calm. After going backwards and forwards several times, she could pretend no longer, but brought him the key. Bluebeard examined it closely and demanded, "How came this blood upon the key?" "I do not know," answered poor Fatima, paler than death. "You do not know?" cried Bluebeard in a terrible voice. "But I know well enough. You have chosen to enter that closet. Mighty well, madame, since that poor room of mine so appeals to your fancy, your whim shall not be denied. You shall go in and take your place among the ladies you saw there." Fatima flung herself at her husband's feet and wept and begged his pardon with every sign of truly repenting her disobedience. She would have melted a rock, so beautiful and sorrowful was she, but Bluebeard had a heart harder than any rock. "You must die, madame," said he, "and that presently." "Since I must die," she answered, looking up at him with eyes all bathed in tears, "grant me a little time to say my prayers." "I grant you," replied Bluebeard, 10 minutes, and not a second more." As she went from him, and through the house towards her own apartment, at the foot of the great staircase she met with her sister Anne, who, unaware of Bluebeard's return, had just arrived to pay her a visit. "Ah, dear sister," cried Fatima, embracing her, "but tell me, oh, for heaven's sake, quickly, where are my brothers Salim and Hassan, who you promised to come with you?" "They are at home," said Anne. "They were detained at parade, and I have come ahead of them. I could wait for them no longer in my impatience to see you." But just as I was starting, they arrived back from the parade ground and sent word that they will follow as soon as they have groomed their horses and spend a happy day with you. "Alas," sobbed Fatima, "they will never see me alive in this world." "But what has happened?" asked her sister, amazed. "He, Bluebeard, has returned." "Yes, and in a few minutes he has promised to kill me. But ask me no questions. There is so little time left. Dear sister, if you love me, run upstairs and still up to the top of the tower. Look if my brothers are not coming, and if you see them, give them a signal to make haste." Her sister Anne left her and ran up to the roof of the tower, and from time to time, as the minutes sped, the unhappy Fatima cried up to her, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anyone coming?" And Sister Anne answered her, "I see nothing but the noon dust a-blowing, and the green grass a-growing." And by, Bluebeard, who had pulled out his huge saber and was trying its edge on the short turf of the terrace, shouted to her, "Wife, your time is up. Come down, and at once." Then, as she made no answer, he shouted again, and as loudly as he could bawl, "Come down quickly, or I will come up to you." "A moment. Give me a moment longer," she answered, and called softly to her sister, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anyone coming?" And Sister Anne answered, "I see nothing but the noon dust a-blowing and the green grass a-growing." "Come down quickly," shouted Bluebeard, "or I will come up to you." "I am coming," answered his wife, and again she cried, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see anyone coming?" "I see," answered Sister Anne, "yonder a great cloud of dust coming." "Is it my brothers?" "Alas, no, sister. I see a flock of sheep." "Will you not come down?" bawled Bluebeard. "Just one moment longer," entreated his wife, and once more she called out, "Anne, Sister Anne, do you see nobody coming?" "I see," she answered, "yonder 2 knights a-riding, but they are yet a great way off." "God be praised," she cried a moment after. "They are our brothers. I am waving my handkerchief to them to hasten." Then Bluebeard stamped his foot and roared out so terribly that he made the whole house tremble. The poor lady came down, and casting herself all in tears and dishevelment at his feet, clasped him by the ankles while she besought him for mercy. "This shall not help you," said Bluebeard. "You must die." Then taking hold of her hair and twisting her head back, the better to expose her beautiful throat, he exclaimed, "This be the lesson I read against curiosity, the peculiar vice of womanhood, and which above all others I find detestable. To that most fatal habit all the best accredited religions, in whatever else they may differ, unite in attributing the first cause of all misfortunes to which the race is subject." In this strain he continued for fully 3 minutes, still grasping her hair with one hand, while with the other he flourished his saber. As he ceased, poor Fatima looked up at him with dying eyes. "Ah, sir," she besought, "if this curiosity be, as you remind me, my worst sin, you will not be so cruel as to destroy me before I have confessed and asked pardon for it. Grant me, then, just one moment more to fix my thoughts on devotion." "No, no," was his answer. "Recommend thyself to heaven." And he swung up his saber to strike. At that very instant there sounded so loud a knocking at the gate that he came to a sudden stop. His arm dropped as the gate flew open, and 2 cavaliers ran in with drawn swords and rushed upon him. Losing his hold on Fatima, who sank fainting upon the grass, he ran to save himself, but the 2 brothers were so hot on his heels that after pursuing him through the vineries and the orange house, they overtook him just as he reached the steps of the main porch. There they ran their swords through his body, and after making sure that he was dead, returned to their sister, who opened her eyes, indeed, as they bent over her, but had not the strength enough to rise and embrace them. Bluebeard had no heirs, and so his wife became mistress of all his estates. She employed a part of her wealth to marry her sister Anne to a young gentleman who had loved her a long while, another part to purchase captain's commissions for her 2 step-brothers, and the rest to marry herself to a very worthy gentleman who made her forget the short but unhappy time she had passed with Bluebeard. Thank you for listening to these stories. If you're still here and you'd like to listen to another story, click here.